one of the major problems that we have is not enough celebrities are talking about the problem. Not enough musicians are talking about the problem. And that sort of was like a big wow moment for me. I was like, okay, we got to try and change this. And having people like William Shatner and Chad Blake and people like that sort of talk about this, it breaks down the taboo. And the more that brave people come forward, the more people will say, actually, yeah, this is a real problem, and I've been struggling by myself in silence.
It's hard to believe that over 700 million people in the world suffer from ringing in the ears, or tinnitus, as it's medically known. For about 10 million who suffer from the severe chronic form of tinnitus, it's not just annoying, it's life-altering, leading to insomnia, anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts. Tinnitus Quest was formed to fast-track research, give voice to the tinnitus community, and push for real treatments within our lifetime. On this episode, Tinnitus Quest founder and board member Sven Köllmann and PR manager Jack Rubinacci talk about the causes of tinnitus, the stigma within the music community, research advances in treatment, recommendations for those suffering with the affliction, and much more. Sven, we were talking before when we first started here, but before we started, and you mentioned about how widespread a problem that tinnitus is, and I never realized it was as widespread as you say. So can you explain that, please?
Yeah, well, as we discussed, tinnitus is one of the major health problems in the world because it's very much correlated to age. Most demographics in the world, most human beings become older and older. So tinnitus and its prevalence is becoming higher and higher. It's mostly related to hearing loss. There can be other forms of it, but that's the main thing. And this is why tinnitus affects in different levels and different severity almost 700 million to 1 billion people worldwide. And that is considered a World Health problem. So this is why, in the end, also our organization exists.
Yeah, Jack, why don't you take us there, Tinnitus Quest and how it was formed and the reasons behind it.
Tinnitus Quest was formed by Sven, together with Hazel and Marco, who run the biggest tinnitus forum in the world. And I was brought on board a little bit later on, a couple of months into it. And basically, the ideology behind it is to try and change the way that it's communicated and try and change the way that tinnitus researchers communicate with the tinnitus community. Because if you think that there's such a huge tinnitus community, but there's not much activity or not much energy within that community. So Tinnitus Quest is trying to become the bridge between the two, because the potential for, doing things with so many people affected is huge. But unless something sort of ignites that spark, we're going to stay around where we are.
I've had it most of my life, but I don't notice it until either I read about it or someone mentions it, and then it's like, oh, this is raging. But otherwise, I live with it, and it doesn't bother me. But I know it bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
I mean, if you think that, like Sven said, there's 700 to maybe 1 billion people affected by it, but 120 million have severe tinnitus. I have severe tinnitus, and that's a lot of people dealing with a really chronic condition that affects their quality of life. But again, it goes back to the fact that not much is said about this and not much is done about it in terms of the community, trying to advocate and trying to get awareness about it.
So Tinnitus Quest is primarily trying to raise the visibility of the problem then, right?
Yeah, well, I think both. I mean, we on one thing, this is how Jack described it. We're building the bridge between the communication side of the researchers and the patients. This was like the foundation that we had to overcome because the communication side was very, very, none too little. And the next step, of course, we're working on is improving research. So we're giving out our first research grants now during the end of the year. Now we are in the full process. We got 29 applications, which is actually a lot in this field, and so we are now, let's say, developing us to becoming one of the major research financing institutions. Of course, we are at the beginning. We only exist for 1 year, and I think in 1 year we have made a tremendous success story, because we were the first ones, especially with the support of Jack, to be able to get celebrities in front of a camera speaking about it. In general, picking up and speeding up the way that the whole community is speaking about us. And I think we used, let's say, business strategies to improve that and develop that. That's the main story that we're working on at the moment.
I know that you have a number of musicians as spokespeople telling their story, and that's very brave of them, because there's a stigma with hearing loss and with anything that has to do with impaired hearing in the music business. So I think it's somewhat subsiding right now, but it's still there. So to get people to speak up is, I would imagine, pretty difficult. True?
Yeah, you know what, Bobby? When Sven gave me the mandate, sort of at the beginning of end of February of 2024, I immediately saw the potential to do something important within the music industry, because I've been making tinnitus videos for about 5 years now, and I've had so many conversations with musicians, and they might say to me, "Can I talk to you in private? Can I not share this? You know, can we keep it confidential?" And of course, it's always confidential. I would never break that trust. But the point that I'm making, Bobby, is that it's a pandemic within the music industry. And a lot of people, when you speak to people, they go, "Oh yeah, I have it," like you said yourself. And you also get a lot of people that say, "Yeah, I have it." It's really, like, it's a different tone of voice. So it's a massive problem within the industry. And I think that I did an interview with a journalist called Bella Bathurst, and she sort of put things into clarity for me, because she said one of the major problems that we have is not enough celebrities are talking about the problem. Not enough musicians are talking about the problem. And that sort of was like a big wow moment for me. I was like, okay, we got to try and change this. And, having people like William Shatner and Chad Blake and people like that sort of talk about this, it breaks down the taboo. And the more that brave people come forward, the more people will say, actually, yeah, this is a real problem. And I've been struggling, by myself in silence,
Yeah, yeah. I think I know the reason for this, but let me ask it anyway. What causes tinnitus?
Yeah, well, the number one factor is hearing loss. Hearing loss can happen through sudden sensorineural hearing loss, so basically out of nowhere. Yeah, so it's not 100% understood what's happening in that moment. It can be through a viral infection of the ear or other forms. Then they are basically noise traumas through music, explosions, shooting, whatever there is that affects that. And then they are other forms of tinnitus that can be caused by malfunctions of the neck, malfunctions of the jaw, and there can be also psychological forms of it, or, for example, linked to certain forms of headaches, migraines, and so on. So there is quite a variety of things that can cause it. In a good number of cases, it's it's not becoming a chronic condition. So you will probably, if you speak to 100 people, probably 90 out of 100 will have experienced some kind of a tinnitus in their life, but really maybe just for 10 seconds or 20 seconds. But it has not become a chronic condition. The work we are doing is on the chronic condition, of course. And the number one protection for not getting a tinnitus or chronic tinnitus is hearing protection. That's the number one thing you can do to prevent it.
You know, it's funny. I had a number of people on the podcast talking about musicians talking about hearing aids. And surprisingly enough, the type of category of musician that loses their hearing the most is orchestral musicians, especially string players, because they have the horns behind them and everything, and they tend to suffer more than anybody else. I thought for sure it was going to be any rock musician on stage, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe it was at one time. I don't think it is now.
You're exactly right, Bobby. So I did an interview with Stephen Osborne, who is considered one of the top pianists. He's a Scottish pianist. And he said to me that it's a problem within the orchestral world, just like you said. And something that Bella Bathurst, again, referring back to that interview, she said that if you are Keith Richards, you sort of can talk about it because you're Keith Richards or whoever you are, and no one's going to replace Keith Richards, But if you are in the orchestra and you have hearing loss or you have tinnitus, it's much harder for them to talk about it. And again, it goes back to the taboo, or this, not taboo, but it's like this mentality around it. And I think it's really important that we, like we've mentioned before, in our conversations in Tinnitus Quest, we've gone so far with mental health. We've improved so much in people being able to talk about it, but tinnitus, especially within the music world, is still something that people feel conscious of talking about. And I think it's something that's got to change, Bobby, because it's such a big problem. And it's such an obvious problem as well. If you're exposing your ears to like 100 dB, three times a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I mean, it's going to be a problem. When I was younger, we'd be doing that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, sometimes an acoustic gig on Sunday. And then Monday to Thursday or whatever, we'd be rehearsing 3-4 hours a night. I mean, you're exposing your ears to so much noise. So it's sort of an obvious problem. And, hearing protection is getting better amongst the younger musicians. They're much more aware of this, but it's a lot of the times it's the older musicians or 30 plus or whoever, And it's something to be discussed. This is why I think it's amazing that people like yourself, Bobby, are having us on and talking about it. It's such an important thing to talk about within the music industry.
I can just give you a very interesting parallel to that. You're talking about hearing protection. So hearing protection has really improved massively. So today you can get a pair of customized hearing protection with a filter in the hearing protection that actually gives you the ability to hear sounds as almost as natural as you would with your ear without hearing protection. And I had I saw two funny developments. I personally was always into electronic music, so this is where I got my tinnitus from. I actually went to a club in Ibiza quite recently, not for a long time, but it was super interesting to see that there was actually a machine selling hearing protection. That was absolutely new to me because I never saw that in my life in any club, but there I think you can see the development. And also, if you see hunters today or sports shooting people, I remember that the older guys never wear any hearing protection, and today you wouldn't see a young person within that not wearing hearing protection. So, I mean, there is some kind of development there, and people are more aware of it. But yeah, it's still a massive problem.
I know I'm pretty sure I got it playing garage bands when I was in high school. And it was exactly what you mentioned, Jack, where, you play in the weekend and then you rehearse during the week. And especially when you're in a garage band first learning, you have no control over volume. And pretty much that's what happened. And right after that, my ears were ringing. But there was no such thing as hearing protection then. I mean, you couldn't find it if you looked for it. You didn't know, you didn't even think, I need this. So I think we've come a long way just from the standpoint that it's readily available and people are aware of it. They do think about it.
Here's what I think, Bobby. With young guys, rehearsals are actually some of the worst problems. So when you're, 15, 16, starting in a band, you'll rehearse anywhere. You'll rehearse wherever it's free, right? So you'll rehearse in a garage, you'll rehearse in any sort of free room. Those rooms are often not acoustically treated, right? They're terrible. They're just walls and, So you're rehearsing, you're young, you're full of testosterone or whatever. You're full of sort of, you want to do great things and you think you're invincible. So the rehearsal rooms are where it starts. That's where the problems start. And then, I came through in the 90s, in the late 90s. That's where I was in a band called Honeyman in Birmingham. I'm from Birmingham in the UK. That's my hometown. And, we were getting some traction, we were sort of doing well. And you feel invincible. And I remember specifically, we rehearsed in a room that's the size of a shoebox. And we had PA, bass, guitars. I mean, it was the whole thing, right? And we rehearsed in a room that was seriously about 3 meters wide and about 6 meters long. And I had a drummer about 1.5 meters away from me on my right side, which funnily enough, there's no difference. My tinnitus is in both ears, but yeah, on my right side. And I remember vividly being the first one. We had these packet of yellow, those earplugs, the cheap ones, the yellow ones. We had them. Someone gave them to us. And I remember specifically, we tried them one night and I thought it was rock and roll to just say, you know what? I pulled them out because I thought it was tough. I thought it was rock and roll. And everywhere we went, in the car to the gig, was loud music. We'd play the Black Crowes. The Black Crowes had just come out with their second album. We loved it. We'd go to a gig, blasting in the car. You'd get in the gig, the sound guy would look at you and he'd, because we were a bit exciting back then, and he'd turn the music up straight. As soon as you walked in, you'd go backstage, there'd be music playing backstage, there'd be lots of people talking, drinking, whatever. You'd go on stage and the noise on stage was so loud that you would feel, you know what I'm talking about, Bobby, you'd feel it in your organs, you know what I mean? You would be rumbling.
Feel the bass
would be like hitting you.
Yeah.
And nobody, neither the band, the sound man, the audience, nobody was even thinking about hearing protection. It just, like you say, Bobby, it just wasn't a thing. So, this is why I feel a bit passionate about this. I feel a bit evangelical about it. I don't go around, like when I'm backstage at gigs, I don't go around talking to people about it. But when they see me put my plugs in, even backstage, people will often come up to me and say, hey, I saw you put your plugs in backstage. What's going on? I say, well, I got severe tinnitus and it's the only way I can and often they will say, yeah, I know what you mean. I've got the same problem. I mean, I've been in so many studios where people go, yeah, I also. And I'm like, this is a problem. This is a huge problem, but hardly nobody's talking about it. So when Sven said, start contacting people, we're ready to start contacting people, I was like, I got really passionate about it. I mean, I got a bit obsessed with it. I was emailing anyone who was sort of, who I thought we could contact, starting with my own personal contacts and then sort of, moving out. And for the first 2 months, nobody wanted to talk to Tinnitus Quest. Like nobody was interested. Not even people I know, people I've had relationships with for, 2-3 years. There's nobody wanted to talk to us. Then we had a breakthrough, Michel Faber, international best-selling author. He said yes. And, I will forever be grateful for that because it gave me hope, thinking that maybe we could actually do this. Because up until that point, it was just, nothing. Then we had a couple of other people. Then we had Chad Blake. And then sort of after that, the door opened. And now we're getting to the point where musicians are really quite keen because they see who else has been talking to us. They see those videos and they say, yeah, you know what, I want to be involved in this. I want to push this wheel forward.
Have you ever noticed that mixing vocals is often the hardest part of getting a track to sound right? You boost, you compress, you add effects, and it still doesn't feel professional. So, to make it easier, I put together a simple mini course on vocal mixing that walks you through the exact steps to get the vocals sounding clear and upfront. If you're interested, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to today's conversation. Okay, speaking of pushing the wheel forward, Sven, you mentioned before about research. What kind of research is going on into tinnitus?
That is a very complicated question because it's quite widespread. So there is a good amount of research that has been done about, let's say, the psychological self-control over tinnitus. Yeah. So what you just mentioned, very typically, that you learn to live with it, is called habituation. So that is the highest form that you can achieve with chronic tinnitus, that you live with it, and that it doesn't bother you. So there has been some research done. It's quite well understood what helps a certain amount of people, but it's not what the tinnitus community wants. The tinnitus community is very, very, very clear on what it wants. It wants a decrease of the sensation of the sound in terms of loudness, or, of course, ideally, a complete cure. So there is a big variety what is being researched at the moment. So we lost quite a lot of years when research in the early days was very much focused on the ear. So the ear is probably, of course, one of the most important trigger points where it all starts through a damage to the inner ear due to noise trauma. But the manifestation of chronic tinnitus happens in your brain. This has been tested in the very, very, very early ages by doctors tried to cut the link between the brain and the ear, which is the hearing nerve. And even though this connection was cut, the tinnitus was perceived still. So it was clear that the problem, the manifestation of the problem is in the brain. So research, especially in the last 15 years, switched from the ear to the brain. So to find out what mechanisms basically trigger this manifestation in the brain and how can we reverse that. This has been tried through very different forms of stimulation of different nerve patterns, through different kinds of medications or combination of medications and so on. But this was always a bit like shooting with your eyes blinded, because the central mechanism where it actually happens and what happens in the brain is not understood 100%. There are models that are investigated, but the main problem, for example, is that we have no objective measurement of the tinnitus. So if you say, just as a very, very good example, you're saying, Bobby, you don't perceive your tinnitus as something bothersome and something you notice. But in the end, the reality is you could have severe tinnitus, but you just, it's not important to you. And on the other hand, with Jack, who says he has severe tinnitus, could be exactly the other way around. So we don't have an objective measurement system, and we know that certain amount of people are highly debilitated by tinnitus, and it could be just a very, very, almost silent tinnitus that, for example, you or Jack or me would perfectly live with. And then there are people who have severe tinnitus, but they live with it. So we're talking about more or less two different things. So one is the manifestation of tinnitus and the amount of negative pressure it puts up on you. And it has of course, comorbidities, it's called. So it's very often linked to things like hyperacusis, so the problem to perceive loud sounds or that normal sounds become bothersome to people. It can be comorbidities with depression and so on. So it's a very wide field, but especially since we started Tinnitus Quest, I think we are very well known in the whole research community now. We see what's going on, and we see a very high rising level of attention in this research field all over the globe, not just in Europe or in the US, all over the globe. And so yeah, it's quite promising to see how that's developing.
So I always thought it was due to something like ear damage that caused it.
Yes, well, that's correct. That's the beginning. That's the start. But the manifestation of the chronic tinnitus happens in your brain. And that is the complicated thing about it, that makes it not so easy to understand. That's the one thing. And the objective measurement. So we don't have a blood test that says, well, if that parameter is 10, then you have a mild tinnitus, if it's 20 or whatever. So that is also one big part of research at the moment, is to find what so-called biomarkers that actually help to, first of all, understand what severity of the tinnitus is actually, perceived by the person. That's one thing. And actually something where you can test a treatment, because now you can just ask the person, if you give him a pill, you can just ask him, is it better or is it worse? So that's the only thing you can do. But that's relative. And that's the main thing there.
Is the frequency the same for everyone?
No. That very much also depends on where the damage in the cochlea has happened. The cochlea we have a spectrum of frequencies, also a spectrum that is deteriorating with age. So, for example, young people can hear very high frequencies, and this is deteriorating over time and age. That is absolutely normal, and it's not something we will have some effect on. But that is a position where it depends where this trauma has happened, and then the frequency is basically in that area, because this missing input information. So you're having hair cells in your cochlea that transmit sound over first mechanical and then biochemical processes over neurons to your hearing nerve and then into your brain. And this is basically when this input information is missing, the brain, why so ever, fills this gap with a tinnitus sound. And the interesting thing, and this is why tinnitus is complicated, is we all know people that have severe hearing loss. Yeah, like people who loved clubs, went to clubs for 40 years, and the best thing was to be 1 meter next to the biggest sound system. And they have hearing aids, and they have, if you would look at their audiogram, then they have severe hearing loss. But you ask them, do you have a tinnitus? No. So this is where it gets a bit funny and complicated. And in general, why tinnitus is not perceived, or over the past years not been getting the attention it needed, as you both already pointed out, it's not a very sexy disease. Yeah, it's nothing sexy, It's not that you can do a nice photo shoot with a celebrity, for example, who had breast cancer, and is looking tough, and the story is missing. That is one of the big things. And the second most important thing is it doesn't kill you. Of course, there is quite a number of suicides, linked to this condition, but just the tinnitus itself will not kill you. And this is why it has not gotten the attention that it needs. And and this is just something we want to change dramatically.
Well, let's talk about some potential ways that we could, you're not going to solve the problem, but at least maybe diminish it somewhat. What are the steps that you might take?
Well, okay, this is also a multi-level approach. So the first thing, and Jack will say something about that because it's his part of the story, is the whole communication part. So we just have to encourage people from all fields to speak about the problem. And the more the people speak about it, very similar to mental health, it was the same story, it will become more prominent and more important. I mean, many people maybe don't recognize, but the number one cause for US veterans disability payments is tinnitus. The number one cause. So just imagine the amount of money that US governments pay to veterans just because of that. And so what we're doing at the moment is we have set up a grant system, not very high in the first year, but we were able to collect a pledge of over €1 million from a donor. We have a crowdfunding platform where people are spending little amounts, $10, $50, $100, and we were able now in the first step to bring out 3 grants with a total of $400,000, which is in 1 year, I think that's a great success. And what we now did is we changed the way those grants are let's say worked on, because traditionally those research grants are very complicated and hundreds of pages and so on. And we said, no, we want a committee with very, very experienced researchers in the field, and we have them. It's led by Dan Polly, which is the director of Mass Eye and Ear, so Harvard Medical School, to see, okay, what's interesting, what's out of the box, and then those researchers have to pitch this idea to us. So very similar to a business setting. And then we will make a very quick decision where the money goes to. And the next step is actually to form a even bigger organization with other players in the field, combine funding, and make this whole movement stronger and stronger. And then we're pretty sure that at some point also governmental organizations will come into the game, industry will come into the game, but this is what we're working on at the moment, and I think we're on a very, very quick and successful path to it, and bring hope to the community that something is done now.
Okay, last question then. Start with you, Jack. What would be your recommendations to someone who's suffering with this? Doesn't know what to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think by talking about it, that is a great start. A burden shared is a burden halved. I think a lot of people don't feel like they can talk about it to their family because no one understands. It's an invisible sort of thing, so nobody understands. So a lot of people keep this inside, and I really believe that by talking about it, you come across other people. Like, for example, if I take my own story, I was not sure whether I wanted to tell people. I told people. Then I had hundreds of people contacting me, and I was like, oh, wow, I'm not so alone. And just purely by thinking you're not so alone, it helps you. Because, we're sort of, we're pack mentality people, aren't we? We don't want to be alone. So I would say, talk about it. I would say, get passionate about it. Because again, you're helping yourself. by getting passionate about it, by talking about it, by getting involved with your tinnitus association. If you don't have a tinnitus association in your country, because you'd be surprised, a lot of countries don't have one, start a Facebook group. Do something, because by helping others, you're helping yourself. I know this sounds sort of, contrary, but it's actually true. It's certainly my sort of story. So I would say share your story, get passionate, get involved, because the more involved you get, the more you see that there is potential within the tinnitus community to do stuff. Like I say, 120 million people have severe tinnitus. Nearly 1 billion people have tinnitus. Imagine what we could achieve if just 10% or even 1% of that community got together and actually did something. And again, by doing this, you are telling your brain that you're not hopeless, that you can actually get involved and do stuff. So this stuff's important. And it's important that we put this message out to anyone who's listening to this. Get involved. Don't suffer in silence. Get involved, because it will help you by getting involved.
Sven, so what would you recommend?
Well, I would take it now more to a medical level. The problem that this community has is that mostly the first doctor you're seeing, besides a general physician, is mostly an ENT. And the ENT will tell you there's nothing that can be done about it, just live with it. And this is something that is horrible to tell to a patient, because it's hopeless. Yeah, it brings you to a very dark place. And I think the most important thing that, let's say, experienced tinnitus patients like Jack and I would tell you, that it will become better. It's not imaginable for the person in that moment, but it will become better. So the brain is able to defocus, to make you live with it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is what Jack said about it. It's important if you want to change something. It's very easy to complain and very hard to do something about it. If you just take us as an example, I'm an entrepreneur, so it's very common for me to start new projects, do new things, and of course do everything it takes to bring success to a project. And we started off from scratch, from nothing, from an idea that I had under the shower. And then I looked for people who shared my vision, shared the idea, thought it's a good idea, and it became a mutual idea. And here we are today, 1 year after we started. And I think we had a couple of very important people speaking to us, without any names mentioned, but big names, telling us, look, within 1 year, you have become one of the most important players in this game, and being recognized by those people, and now starting to talk to them to bring this whole to a next level. And this is where also the normal patient, wherever he is on the planet, if you can spare $5, €5, €10, €20, whatever your amount and allows you to donate to a cause like Tinnitus Quest, can be something different, but that's just an example. And to talk about it, to communicate about it in social media, share our information and so on. This will bring hope. And since tinnitus has a very, very big psychological factor. So I had a mathematician from England said it the best way possible. Some days are stone and some days are diamond. And this is where it all is, you know, and this is where you start to become part of such a movement. And of course, for the music community, maybe also listening, of course, to this podcast, is speak about it, encourage also the big names to speak about it, and as funny as it sounds, protect your hearing.
I think that's a great place to stop. Sven, Jack, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. And you can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.